I went to Texas
Gotcha.
recently, and I was like, actually, Atlanta's the spot.
It's
That's
the
right.
vibe. I don't know if you can say that around some Texans. They might come for your neck.
Right.
You heard that. All right. Welcome to Couch Time with Kayla. I'm happy to see you. I'm happy to see anybody that's come back for some episodes. We're talking about the Black LGBTQ plus Pride series for this Couch Time. And I'm so happy to have with me is Matt, who's going to talk a little bit more about the Black trans man experience. So with that being said, I'll turn it over to you. Just tell the viewers a little bit about yourself.
All righty. Hello, everybody. My name is Matt Turner. I am a Black trans man. Recently 24. So yay, shout out to me. So yeah, I am a Black trans man. I've been on testosterone for going on 3 years. And as of kind of this year, I have officially completed my medical transition. So all about that if you want as well, because I know a lot of people have questions about that. And yeah, I'm just here to help spread awareness, talk about exercise science if you get me into it. And my pronouns are he, him, his.
All right, awesome. No, we'll plug you at the end. That way, if people want to ask you some additional questions or want to know where to find you to talk about exercise science, then they'll know how to. Awesome. So yeah, tell me a little bit about your transgender journey.
Well, so I guess I'll start us at the very beginning.
Okay.
Because I think looking back on it, I'm like, oh, there weren't any signs or anything like that. It's very interesting to me kind of how like time increases like your awareness of like past actions and stuff like that. But actually the very first time that I ever heard of being transgender was my freshman year of college. Wow. Which is insane because like I imagine what I like would have probably done as a kid if I had known that was a thing. Yeah. But it was one of my best friends. At the time we had all been like assigned female at birth and like cis and everything like that. And then one day they were like, hey, yo, no, I'm actually trans. I'm a trans man. My pronouns are he, him, his. And then I was like, oh, that's a thing. Like, that's real. And so that was like my very first like introduction into being trans. Wow, yeah. And I was like, oh, like, this opens so many doors for me to like reevaluate some things in my life, because I was like, no, like tick, tick, tick. These things kind of like line up now. But at that time, I like didn't actually consider myself trans or anything. I was still very much like cis. And then I finally, like through my junior year, I met my girlfriend, and she kind of like was like, she asked me, she was like, have you ever thought of like being trans, or like, have you ever thought of like, what if you were trans? And I was like, yeah, no, kind of.
What made her say that, you think?
So she's always been kind of like more open-minded, I guess I would say. Like she had experienced a lot more things. And I guess also maybe some of the things that I said and did probably was kind of like, some things like don't like add up 100%, or like, have you ever like thought about that and like self-reflected on that?
Gotcha. Okay.
And so then that kind of like led me to like really sit down and be like, okay, I know like what being trans is. I know like I've kind of thought about it on and off over the years. Yeah. But like I never sat down to like really like think about it. Like, oh, am I trans? Like, do I actually like identify as a man? And eventually I got to the answer like, yeah, no. Yeah, like I'm definitely a man. Yeah. And so then that sparked my medical transition. I like, for me, that was the biggest thing, was like medically transitioning. socially transitioning, that kind of like occurred as I was medically transitioning. And so for that first year, I was still very much like in the closet, but also like everybody could definitely like tell like something was going on. But like the end of that year is kind of when I started, you know, becoming very much more confident in who I am. Like it was insane. Like being able to get on testosterone, like really like opened doors for me in terms of like self-love and self-care. Because I had never in my life, I like look back on it sometimes, I'm like, I probably like disassociated a lot. Like actually, which was one of the reasons why I was so hesitant to like identify with being trans, because for some people they say you need gender dysphoria. And I was like, I don't know if I've ever 100% like had gender dysphoria. For me, it was very much kind of like, oh, this is my lot in life and better just like work it out and keep it rolling.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that though too, because that is a requirement, right? Often is you have to have that diagnosis, but every trans person does not have gender dysphoria. And so kind of like, what do you do? Like if that is you, and so for people who are listening, often what we'll do is like clinicians is we try to, and I hope that your counselor did that too, is kind of say that this is what we define as gender dysphoria. And I want you to know the reason why we're putting it here is because of X, Y, and Z, and kind of talk through that process a little bit with somebody. And so I don't know how if that was your experience, but that's probably how we try to talk about it. So that way people don't feel like, well, you know, this is what I'm feeling.
Yeah, I don't actually remember too much what she said so long ago. I just remember I was really hesitant to like go to therapy. Like I was, oh my goodness, I look back on it, I was so hesitant to go to a therapist and like start medically transitioning like through insurance, because it required so many like jumping through hoops to get stuff that I was like, okay, but like what if I go to therapy and they're like, you're not trans because you don't have dysphoria. And I'm like, what does that even look like?
Right?
Yeah, exactly. But I was very, very fortunate to have a great therapist. She wasn't like a gender therapist or anything like that. But she was like very open and accepting, and like by being that, it allowed me to like reflect as I would explain things to her. I'm like, is that, or is that kind of just like me having some biases or something like that and crazy stuff? But that was like one of the best like therapists I've ever had. I loved her. But yeah, like not being able to like have like dysphoria definitely kept me from definitely identifying. And then I don't even remember what I was gonna say, honestly.
No, you were good. You were talking a little bit about you were getting closer to when you started medically. You were talking transitioning. You were talking about the socially transitioning, like you were starting to come out. People didn't know, but you kind of did. Yeah.
Oh, that's actually very interesting, because to show how hesitant I guess I was about like coming out is I had been going to the LGBTQ resource center for like 2 years at that point. Like I knew everybody there, everybody knew me, and I was like medically transitioning and I didn't tell any of them. Like I was just like, and it's crazy because like so many of them were like accepting. We had QPOC people there. Like there was literally no reason outside of like my own kind of like, oh, people like won't think I am trans because like I'm not very dysphoric right now about anything. And so that was like one of the most insane moments. But then I go back now and I'm like, hey, like, what's up? I know it's been a while and I probably look like really different.
No, but let's keep going with that too, because like I'm curious like what the messages or like the misconceptions were like around transitioning or that you heard, because I hear you kind of like had some internal messages about what you believe people might think or say.
Well, definitely one of them is like that you have to have dysphoria. I like, obviously from a like insurance and like,
Right.
you know, getting referrals and things of that nature, like, yeah, gender dysphoria is kind of a requirement. But that was one of the biggest misconceptions that I definitely had about being trans, was like, you need to like severely like dislike your body and all of that. Cause I was kind of like, no, like,
Mhm.
I don't know, I could put some moves down. Like, I don't know about y'all. Like, I look good. Like, I was like, I'll put this jacket on. I'll be like, like, I was still very like, no, I can be happy. Like, I'm content. Like, I'm content, but could I be happier? Of
Right.
course. Like,
Right.
so that was definitely one of them. Another one that I hear a lot, actually, which is really funny from a exercise science standpoint now, is that testosterone makes you like super aggressive
I've
and
heard that
super
too.
angry. And like, from a exercise science point, it's like, no, that's like kind of factually incorrect.
Yeah, talk more about that. Yeah.
So it's kind of like a how do I put it? It's, you got to think about it, and it's a little finessed. I'll say that. I can't think of the word I want to use right now, but it's got like a little bit of a little something that makes it a little bit different from, you know, just testosterone makes you aggressive. What it really is your body going through hormone imbalances creates upsetness, anger, you're irritable because your body's not in homeostasis and it's trying to keep that. You'll notice like there are, you know, men who aren't like aggressive or anything like that. That's where a lot of like this steroid users are aggressive kind of rumors and myths came about. It's because back then a lot of them weren't, you know, like keeping up on their health. They weren't taking the proper like protocol medications that go along with having to have testosterone, like, you know, like AI inhibitors, which like basically stops your testosterone from converting into estrogen, which is what causes that imbalance, actually. Right. Exactly. Which for a lot of trans men will come from sometimes having too large of a dose, or just like some of them, you know, trying to think that more testosterone will make, you know, certain changes happen faster. And then it's like, oh, your testosterone levels are really high. Yeah. So that's kind of like that. But like for me personally, I like was consistent throughout my entire change. And I think part of that is like, I'm just very mellow. I'm not like the kind of person that wants to like, you know, get in confrontations. Like I will if I have to, but I'm like, hey, like just text me or something. Like we can work it out. Like I'm very flexible and I'm definitely willing to compromise on a lot of things. So it's like, I don't really get into a lot of situations where I might get like irritated. Right. Though my girlfriend would probably say differently.
Well, what would she say?
She's definitely probably told me like on one hand or account that I got a little snippy at some points. But I can now at this point, I can tell like, oh, no, this is definitely just like a hormone imbalance. Like when I may miss a shot due to whatever reason, like as soon as my testosterone levels start tanking and like it's getting out of my system, I become more irritated. And so it's that constant fluctuation of hormones going up and down that causes that irritation that a lot of people talk about.
Absolutely. So I hear you trying to take away this myth that once you start this, it creates this. It's just your body like trying to hit that homeostasis, that balance, and it's reacting, right? And so
yeah,
okay,
exactly.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. So I'm in my work and in my experience around people, I hear often just various, misconceptions. One is, the toxic masculinity is what I've heard, like what you mentioned. It's like, once I start this, I'm aggressive, high sex drive, all this stuff, all these other aspects. I don't know if you want to speak to that, but I'm curious, like, if you received any misconceptions, or even the way people talked about you when you were trying to transition, or even before that, like what kind of things you heard that other people might hear?
I definitely will talk on the libido thing, because that is a myth. That is a myth.
For those listening, libido is, everybody has a libido. It is what kind of fuels your sex drive, right? So it's either high, or it can be low. Go ahead.
Yeah. And so a lot of people will say like getting on testosterone will increase your libido. It's very individual based. Like I like tanked. I was like, get away from me. Don't touch me. I'm hot. Like, go away. Like, I did not have any of that. I actually find that to be more of a mental state now than anything, which I guess can also be, maybe a factor in, whether your libido is actually affected or not, because it's like, oh, if you're not comfortable in yourself already, why would you have a libido? Like, why would you have a high libido now? So that was definitely one of the things that I was like kind of looking forward to, and then like it didn't happen. But I've made my peace with it and everything like that, and it's kind of more just kind of like I don't know, it's a characteristic that they say that happens.
Right.
So then there was that one. I can't remember exactly everything else.
Oh, no, you're good. Any messages that you received from others, especially, even within the trans community as a Black trans man? I'm curious if any messages that you received at that time.
So it's very weird actually, as a Black trans man, because at least, especially trying to find other Black trans men, I feel like I got a lot of messages from the Black community in that sense, because I was like, I couldn't find them.
Right, yeah.
That's why it was so important for me to like start all of these Reddit pages. So what I was always kind of dealing and struggling with was separating a lot of the advice that I would get from like white trans men and like mainstream trans men, and kind of like how my experience as a Black trans man would differ. And it definitely is like kind of different from like an intensity point as well. Like some of them will always say like, oh, like women don't like invite me into their circles as much anymore. And it's like, as a Black trans man, my experience has been like a complete isolation. It's like no one wants to sit next to you, no one wants to really make eye contact with you. It's very much kind of like, oh, it's very much like, you're a man, and also like some racism in there, and it's like, I'm definitely gonna like go this way.
Isn't that like the LGBTQ community, or just
like just like across the board, in terms of like my experience as a Black trans man trying to like get advice on on kind of like what transitioning was going to be like.
Oh, I see.
For me, and it once I started finding those people, I realized that it was definitely very much on par with what I was experiencing. Like a lot of them would be like, yeah, you'll become kind of like I won't say like a outcast, but like you're kind of struggling from all sides. It's like you're dealing with issues within the Black community, you're dealing with issues within like the queer community, and trying to like navigate all of those different circles, while being kind of like not very visible.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't really have advice for you. Like that was, again, that was why it was so important for me to kind of like make these spaces, because it was like, no, like there are people who are going through these things, like here's what I experienced. And now it's really nice to see actually like a lot of like queer and trans people of color like in these spaces, like sharing like the different things that they've been through, because it widely differs in some senses between like all these different communities. um but yeah, like those were like the biggest misconceptions, but also um a more recent one, I guess I would say, is kind of like you're not going to be accepted within like your own community. Like this, I don't know. I think you probably heard about this before, that like Black people are extremely homophobic and transphobic. And like it's very like, that had me like a little bit kind of like, oh, okay, but also like not really, because my family is not homophobic and transphobic.
Yeah.
And then my experience actually turned out to be obviously the complete opposite. Like most of the Black men in my lives have been very accepting and like and willing to like mentor and kind of like guide me this journey
Wow, that's
into
good to hear.
male adulthood.
Yeah.
So that was like one of the really biggest things that was like definitely is kind of constantly going back and forth within the trans masculine community. But yeah, like those were the main big misconceptions for me, at least.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when I hear that, one thing that comes to my mind is like this huge misconception of like you're going to be deeply isolated from the people you care about, that care about you, and just on this global scale. And I'm so happy to hear that wasn't your experience, because it makes me hope that maybe things are changing for many. But I know maybe like early 2000s for sure, up until the 2010s, it was rough.
Yeah.
I mean, like everywhere around, it's just like, ooh, no. And then you have people like now Kendrick Lamar. I don't know if you've listened to his new album, but he
have not yet.
You should check out his song, his Auntie Diaries, where he's.
I have heard about it. I have heard about it. I haven't listened to it yet, but I've been hearing it talked about.
There's a lot of mixed feelings. Someone said it to me,
yeah,
and I was like, okay, let me check it out. And I'm like, huh, okay. So the fact that he's singing about, a family member two family members that transitioned, and how he processed that, like that, like hip hop talking about it. But you're right, because our culture with music doesn't send often a very inviting message to anybody within the LGBTQ community.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually one of the things, I guess, overall transitioning that I would say is like been one of the biggest things that has changed for me. Is like really the media you consume is like the repetitive thoughts and messages that you'll see. And I've just kind of like, I'm like, no, I can't keep doing this. Like, it's very weird. I'm getting to the point where I'm like, I don't know about like hip hop culture right now. Like, I'm gonna stay over here with my Ari Lennox.
Yeah.
And my Erica Baidu.
Like, okay, I see your vibes though. I like it.
Yeah. I'm like, I'm staying over here.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But every once in a while you gotta jam out.
Dude, yeah, but it's like you have to kind of choose. I hear it's like, all right, I'm gonna get, how triggered am I gonna get in this right now, which is hard.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, that makes sense, because in the Black community, often hip hop, R&B, just our culture, it moves through music, and it just the way people talk and the language, and sometimes people, when they listen, they can't tell if they're not a part of the communities. But those who are a part of the community, they pick up on the kind of way that they're describing something, or the terms that they're using, which is awful, right? But I would say, honestly, the biggest misconception that I often hear in my work, because I do work with a lot of individuals in the trans community, and often like while they're in the process of transitioning, like you mentioned, socially transitioning, right? And then moving to medically transitioning. I hear this like literally with every single person is, I'm not trans enough, right? If
Yeah.
I don't look trans, or I don't deserve to be in this space because I haven't medically transitioned. And I'm curious if you can kind of speak, you know, a little bit to that, on just like how you would describe like the spectrum, you know, of like gender identity, transitioning, all of that.
Actually, that was one of that's definitely been coming up a lot more. I'm seeing.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard because for me at that time, I was equating being trans with gender dysphoria because I was so focused on medically transitioning. But afterwards, I've kind of been very kind of watching how other people have been talking about this topic. And it's very much kind of becoming more of a, okay, who's like gender fluid and who's trans in the sense of binary.
Mm-hmm.
And I see a lot of like, oh, I'm not trans enough coming from those who are kind of like in fluctuation, like trans masculine individuals who may not identify with being like strictly binary.
Right.
And so there's that component to it, which is kind of, to me, I've been seeing is like held up and enabled by this concept of like going stealth and being cis passing, which
You're saying a lot. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
The degree in which like being cis passing is like held up in the trans community is insane, actually. Like
For
and
those
it's
that, oh, I was gonna say, for those that are listening, they may not know what cis passing. Would you feel comfortable like just?
so
Yeah.
yes, so cis passing is basically this idea of like, as you are medically transitioning, you can't be identified as like being trans. Like trans has a specific look, which it comes from a lot of actual transphobia, in that like trans women look like men, and like trans men are just like really, really masculine lesbians, and like a lot of just like transphobia all around.
Internalized too, a little bit too.
Mm-hmm. And so it's like, okay, at a glance, when I look at you, do you just like look like a cis man that I would pass on the street, which becomes very, very difficult to kind of be like, oh yeah, that's what that looks like, because bodies come in so many different proportions and sizes and variances. And so it's kind of got like this toxic concept that upholds like being trans enough, but also it's this kind of defense mechanism. Like being cis passing is definitely used as a defense mechanism because, well, if you're stealth and nobody knows that you're trans and they happen to be, you know, transphobic, or like, I don't know, like they want to attack you or anything, like it's like you don't like have to worry about that because no one's going to second guess who you are or anything like that, or what you identify as. And so I find a lot of going back and forth with this idea of like being trans enough, and like being a trans man is like being masculine. Like I encourage, please come to Reddit if you are a trans like man and you have like a feminine expression, like please come, we are looking for you.
We'll drop the information below so you can see it,
because they exist, and like I know so many of them don't feel welcome in some spaces because the like trans standard is like being binary, being masculine, and like, you know, just like working towards being cis passing basically. So that's definitely what I've been seeing on the topic of like being trans and
No, I mean, but like as I'm listening, it's like my heart gets sad too, because you're right. There's the phobia aspect, but then there's like the inherent sense of safety. And was it 2020, or I think it was 2020, where especially Black trans individuals were being murdered at so many high rates.
Yeah.
So it's like that whole level, which is helpful for me to even reflect on, like to speak to that on a deeper level. But it's like this other identity aspect, but it's a true sense of safety. And the message again underneath that is cis is safe, trans is unsafe, right? So you, even as you're transitioning, you want to get to this optimal level, whatever, right, of being trans, so that way you're also safe from harm and danger.
Yeah. It's I was actually like thinking about like everything I would say when we were when we did this, because like in the end, I guess the biggest thing that I've learned from like my journey is like security and self-care and self-love create like the ultimate environment for you to be who you want to be and like prosper and be like happy, actually like truly happy and satisfied. But it's so difficult to get to those like moments. Like it's like a constant, you gotta like really like be checking in with yourself and like asking like, are you happy? Is this like what you want to do? And then you have external forces of like people asking you like, are you sure about this? Like, are you sure you want to go through with this? Like, you know, once you do this, like you can't go back, which is one of the biggest like fear mongering tactics with like stopping people from medically transitioning. It's being like, okay, when you like you can't go back, like there's no going back, which isn't completely true either. That's another misconception, is that like a lot of the changes from testosterone are permanent, which again, it's like your miles may vary. Like some people lose all their facial hair, some like keep their fat distribution. It's just like however your body wants to like react to these chemicals. And so like it's just a cycle.
Actually, so speaking maybe from your own personal experience, how were you able to kind of keep the joy, find the security, practice self-love?
Definitely. And that's like actually really good to mention, because when you're like transitioning, there are kind of a lot of what people will say down moments where like you're not going through surgeries, you're not like changing gender markers or anything like that. And it's like, whew, I feel like I'm not like transitioning fast enough, or like nothing's going on to like help improve my life. And I definitely had moments like that along the way. It's like, when am I gonna finally get to like this point, or when will I finally be able to like get my markers changed? And for me, I found like hobbies to be the best thing to like take your mind off of constantly, you know, thinking about transitioning, because it does have a tendency sometimes to kind of become your sole focus. Like there were bouts where I was definitely just focused on getting top surgery or bottom surgery, and it's like nothing else like mattered sometimes. But like picking up hobbies, like getting into gardening, going for walks, taking up meditation, all of those things like helped to fill my time, along with weightlifting.
What you do, yeah.
Yep, I do a lot of
out
weightlifting. A lot of weightlifting.
Yeah.
But also taking those downtimes, because it's very, very easy to kind of forget where you started on your journey to where you are now, to feel like you're not having a lot of progress, or like you're not moving, is like actually looking back and being like, no, like this is where I was like 5 months ago, and now look at me, like I like I have beard hair, I have a deeper voice. Like the changes are occurring, like you just have to be patient. And it's like I don't want to say I'm better off than I was before, but you know what I mean? Like, oh, like look, I have moved forward in what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
um
It's like
and so
mindfulness. Yeah.
yeah, definitely mindfulness is a lot of what I did during those down moments for sure.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. So thinking, let's say about that, what advice or encouragement would you give to Black people that are transitioning or that think about transitioning or feel any way on that spectrum of transitioning?
I would say, gosh, there's a lot of things I
I
could
know
say
that's a big
honestly.
question. It's a loaded question. I know. Yeah.
I guess I would say don't think you can't do something because someone says you can't do it, you haven't seen it done before, or you don't think that there's the resources out there for it. And I'll go into like each one of those. I'll break them down.
Okay, go ahead.
So don't think that you can't do something because people say you can't do it. For instance, a lot of people didn't like the idea. One of my friends, he decided to get his arm tattooed before he had bottom surgery, which normally you have done afterwards. It's like people are like, no, you shouldn't do that. Like you're gonna have to go through like revisions and like all these other things. And it's like, that's okay. I'm okay with revisions. Like I want to do this because this is what is gonna make me happy. Like I'm okay with any regrets 100% doing it this way. And I think that's what's really important. And that's the mentality I've had to use a lot going through this process. It's like, okay, if I do transition and I don't end up liking it, I'm content with knowing that I tried and that I, you know, like it wasn't for me. That's life. It wasn't for me. And I would say also because you don't think there aren't the resources out there, I did not think I was ever going to get top surgery. And I know a lot of people like struggle with financial situations when it comes to transition, especially like Black trans people with having, you know, just all the crazy nonsense going on 24/7, trying to like have the means to transition because it is an expensive process for sure. Is like you can find a way. There's like grants out there, there's fundraisers, you can start GoFundMe, which I know some people like feel kind of like I don't want to ask for money. And it's kind of like if you want it, you can find the means to do it, and you can even do it in ways where like you don't feel like you're taking a handout or like you're like not capable. And then if you want something but you feel like it's never been done before, I think that's what I basically like if you want to try something when it comes to transitioning and no one's ever, you know, like done it that way before, just do it. Like I know some people who like don't want to medically transition but are absolutely okay with socially transitioning. That's absolutely fine. Like it doesn't have to be like, okay, I have to do A, B, C, D, E, F, G. It can be, I'm going to try A. If I like A, I'll stick with A. Right. And if I want to add on B, I can add on B. Like it's very much like a process. I always say transitioning is a process because there's stops in it, there's holds, there's breaks, and it's something that kind of eventually kind of does come to an end in some senses. Like I'm done medically transitioning, so like for now, for me, it's literally just like living life. It's just but it's like also transitioning is a part of life, so that it's like a process within a process, so it's kind of just
oh, that's yes, I hear it. It's like life is consistently transitional, right? It
yeah,
just
exactly
what transition means. Yeah,
yes, exactly. And And yeah, just, I mean, there's no right or wrong answers, honestly, when it comes to transitioning. It's whatever you're content with, whatever makes you happy, whatever gives you self-love and it allows you to express yourself in the most optimal way.
Yes, like trusting yourself and loving yourself. It's like I hear a lot of that coming and exuding from what you're saying.
Mm.
Awesome. And one thing I'll add, like you mentioned earlier, if you're feeling like you're isolated or you're alone, or you're on an island, no one understands you, there are people out there, like Matt mentioned, on Reddit, and we'll drop against, I'll tell you, actually, I'll let you at the end, like, plug yourself where people can find you on social media, because I think you do such an excellent job just giving exposure, offering answers to questions, but there's community out there for you, and thank goodness for social media, other avenues, if that's all you have, because you don't have anything, you know, within you and your environment, know that there's spaces for you and that you're not alone.
Yeah.
Okay? So before we close, why don't you just plug yourself so people know where to find you?
So I have a few spots.
I'll get them all. Go ahead.
All right. You can find me on IG at Morganson551. That's where I primarily, you know, just promote fitness content and, you know, document my transition. I also document my transition on YouTube. My username is just Matt Turner. And then if you ever need a community on Reddit, you can go to r/TMPOC. You can go to r/TFPOC. You can go to BlackTransgender. You can go to TQPOC, which is another recent one that I started up for just people who are trans or queer, who are people of color. Because as I started transitioning, I was like, I'm around a lot of like dudes. Like, where are my trans femmes at? Like, let's link up. So I created that one to kind of bring the trans, queer, people of color community kind of closer together. And yeah, like literally across the board, there's also BlackTransmen. You can hit up on there. Across the board, we have a ton of spaces where you can find community, and we're all super welcoming, honestly. Like, we allow you to vent if you need to vent. There's a lot of people who definitely probably have either gone through what you're going through or can sympathize and empathize with what you're going through. And also, we're there to just have fun and chit chat.
Sounds like a vibe.
Yeah, I try to keep everything a vibe.
Awesome. Yes. Well, Matt, I am so grateful that you shared all this on this platform. I know it's going to help so many people, and I appreciate everything that you're doing. Okay? And so I hope y'all appreciated everything too. So keep tuning in for the Black Pride series, and see you later.